Somewhere in Australia, right now, there is a house with a veranda, a quiet street, and a yard big enough to lose yourself in, selling for less than you paid for your last car. No bidding wars, no landlord, no lease renewals, just a set of keys and the sound of nothing. While the rest of the country watches property prices climb into the stratosphere, a different kind of Australia still exists. These are the towns the algorithm does not recommend, the postcodes the influencers never visit. In 13 towns across this country, the average person can still afford to buy a home, build a life, and wake up to silence. Not the silence of isolation or defeat, but the silence of a place that figured out something the cities forgot. This is not a property investment guide. This is something more important. This is a map of the Australia that still makes sense. If the Australia outside the headlines is the Australia you want to find, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. We visit these places so you do not have to wonder if they are real. Number 1. Broken Hill, New South Wales. Broken Hill sits at the western edge of New South Wales, so far from Sydney that it shares a time zone with Adelaide rather than its own state capital. The landscape here is raw and ancient, flat red earth running to every horizon, cut by dry creek beds and dotted with the skeletal frames of old mine shafts that catch the afternoon light like rusted sculptures. This is outback Australia in its most uncompromising form, and for most of its history, it was a place people left when the ore ran out. The population peaked during the mining boom and has been quietly declining ever since, which sounds like a warning but reads more accurately as an opportunity. Median house prices in Broken Hill sit around $180,000, and for that sum, you get a solid brick house, a wide yard, and a street that knows your name within the first week. The town produced BHP Billiton, one of the largest mining companies on Earth, but today its most visited addresses are its art galleries. The Pro Heart Gallery, the Jack Absalom Gallery, and the Silver City Mint Drawer visitors who arrive expecting dust and leave talking about colour. The skies above Broken Hill are rated among the darkest in Australia for stargazing, and the light before sunset turns the whole landscape the colour of cooling iron. In Broken Hill, the cost of entry is low, and the quality of life is something the real estate listings do not know how to price. Number 2. Charters Towers, Queensland. 130 kilometres inland from Townsville, Charters Towers is a Queensland town that wears its gold rush history on every corner. The streetscapes here are remarkable. Wide avenues flanked by sandstone buildings with ornate facades that were erected in the 1880s when this was one of the wealthiest towns in Australia. The gold ran out, the population drifted south, and the buildings remained. That is the gift. Walking through Charters Towers now feels like moving through a film set that nobody remembered to lock. Median house prices sit around $200,000, which in the context of modern Australia is an extraordinary figure. For that, you get space, a quiet street, and the particular dignity of living inside architecture that was built to last several lifetimes. The town has nearly 9,000 residents and a weekly market that functions as the social backbone of the place. Temperatures run genuinely hot in summer, and that is not a detail to dismiss when you are thinking about making the move. But the winters here are clear and mild, and the kind of days that make you question why anyone chooses to live somewhere cold. The Zara Clark Museum and the Courthouse Gallery keep the town's history visible rather than buried behind glass. Charters Towers is not a compromise. It is a deliberate choice, the kind that requires you to decide what a good life actually looks like before you go searching for one. Number 3. Queenstown, Tasmania. No town in Australia looks like Queenstown. Sitting in a bowl of bare, multicoloured hills in Tasmania's Wild West, the town has an industrial history so intense that it stripped the surrounding mountains of every living thing, leaving them polished and iridescent, green and copper, and bronze and grey. a landscape that by any conventional measure should be ugly, but is instead completely transfixing. Copper mining began here in the 1880s and continued for well over a century, shaping not just the land, but the character of the people who stayed. The ones who stayed are loyal in the way that only people who have chosen a hard and beautiful place can be. Queenstown is consistently listed among the most affordable places to buy property in all of Australia. Median prices have sat below $150,000, which means that for the price of a car deposit in Sydney, you can own a house outright in one of the most visually extraordinary towns on the continent. The town sits on the edge of the Franklin Gordon Wild Rivers National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Area of temperate rainforest and mountain rivers. The Gordon River runs dark with tannin, the colour of strong tea, and the silence of the forest just outside town is complete. Queenstown is not for everyone, but for the right person, it is the answer to a question they did not know how to ask. Number 4. Maryborough, Victoria. Mark Twain visited Maryborough in 1895 and wrote with characteristic sharpness that it was a railway station with a town attached. The railway station he was dismissing is now a National Heritage Landmark, a cathedral of gold rush prosperity that took 11 years to build and stands today as one of the finest Victorian-era structures in regional Australia. The town around it has settled into a comfortable middle age, the gold long gone, but the bones of prosperity still visible in every wide street, every ornate shopfront, every bluestone building that has outlasted the ambitions that created it. Maryborough sits in central Victoria, equidistant from Ballarat and Bendigo, surrounded by dry eucalypt forests and the flat golden paddocks of the Central Highlands. Median house prices hover around $280,000, which places it firmly within reach for anyone tired of renting in a capital city. The town has a strong crafting and antique culture, a farmers market that draws people from surrounding districts, and a pace of life that feels generous rather than merely slow. The schools are solid and the hospital is functional. The annual Thomas Festival brings families from across Victoria and keeps the town's identity anchored to something tangible. Maryborough is not a destination in the tourist sense. It is a destination in the life sense, and those are considerably harder to find. Number 5. Bingara, New South Wales. Bingara sits in the New England region of New South Wales, in a valley carved by the Gambier River, surrounded by granite outcrops and dry eucalypt scrub that turns silver in the afternoon heat. It is the kind of town that appears on a road trip as a genuine surprise. A main street with a working pub, a heritage theatre, and a row of shops that still open at reasonable hours for reasons that have nothing to do with tourism or foot traffic algorithms. The Roxy Theatre in Bingara was built in 1936 and has been lovingly restored by the community to its original Art Deco interior. That theatre is a clue to how Bingara operates. The community here invests in the things that matter to it rather than waiting for a grant to tell them what matters. Median house prices sit in the low 200s, making it one of the more accessible entry points to property ownership in New South Wales. The river flats support cattle and mixed farming, and the surrounding country offers horse riding, gem fossicking, and walking tracks that take you somewhere rather than simply around a car park. The Gambier River, running clear over round granite boulders, is one of the better-kept secrets of the New England. Bingara is not promoted and does not need to be. The people who find it tend to stay, and the people who stay tend to become the kind of neighbours that city dwellers spend their whole lives hoping for. Number 6. Ararat, Victoria. Ararat has the unusual distinction of being the only town in Australia founded by Chinese immigrants, a group of several thousand gold miners who arrived overland from South Australia in 1857 and struck gold almost immediately, establishing a settlement that grew into one of the most quietly prosperous small towns in Victoria. The gold brought wealth, the wealth brought infrastructure, and the infrastructure created a built environment that survives today in the form of solid brick buildings, tree-lined streets, and a main road that still functions as a genuine commercial centre. The Great Dividing Range sits on the eastern horizon, and the Grampians rise to the west, meaning Ararat is positioned between two of Victoria's most dramatic landscapes without being consumed by either. Median house prices sit around $270,000, and the town offers good schools, a functioning hospital, and a wine region on its immediate doorstep. The Great Western Sparkling Wine District begins just 8 kilometres from the main street, which means that a Friday evening in Ararat involves neither traffic nor an expensive cab. The pace here is unhurried without being inert. The infrastructure of a town that believes in itself combined with the humility of a place that never felt the need to advertise. The J. Ward Museum, a former prison asylum, is one of the more unusual heritage sites in Victoria. Number 7. Mount Gambier, South Australia. Mount Gambier is built on the rim of a volcano that last erupted approximately 5,000 years ago, and the evidence of that geological past is impossible to ignore. The Blue Lake turns a startling cobalt blue every November and holds that colour through summer before fading back to grey in autumn, sitting at the centre of town like something that should not be possible. The town built around this marvel has a population of around 30,000, which makes it the second largest city in South Australia, but the prices have not followed that logic. Median house prices in Mount Gambier sit around $280,000, extraordinary value given the infrastructure on offer. Strong manufacturing and timber industries provide genuine employment stability, a university campus, multiple hospitals, and a commercial centre that services most of southeast South Australia and the western districts of Victoria. The Crater Lakes Reserve in the centre of town offers walking tracks among volcanic sinkholes, garden caves, and limestone formations worn smooth over centuries. The surrounding region is plantation pine forest and the rich red soil of the Coonawarra Wine District, home to some of the most respected Cabernet Sauvignon in Australia. Mount Gambier is the rare entry on this list that offers genuine city infrastructure at small town prices. That combination does not stay unnoticed forever, and the window for getting in at current prices may be shorter than it appears. Before we continue with the remaining 6 towns on this list, if you have stayed this far, you already know this is not a video about escape fantasies. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep finding places like these, and share this video with anyone you know who is tired of paying rent in a city that no longer makes financial sense. Number 8. Ravensthorpe, Western Australia. Ravensthorpe sits in the south coast region of Western Australia, 530 kilometres from Perth, in a landscape of mallee scrub and granite outcrops that transforms into one of the premier wildflower regions on Earth every spring. The town is small, fewer than 2,000 permanent residents, built initially around copper and gold mining in the early 1900s, and sustained in the modern era by a nickel mining operation that continues to provide employment and economic stability. What Ravensthorpe offers beyond affordability is access to natural space that is genuinely difficult to replicate elsewhere in Australia. The Ravensthorpe Range, the Fitzgerald River National Park stretching west toward the coast, and the rugged Southern Ocean shoreline all sit within 40 minutes of the main street. Median house prices are among the lowest in Western Australia, often below $150,000, and the community carries the compact warmth of a place where everyone present made a conscious decision to be there. The wildflower season, running from August through November, turns the surrounding scrubland into a botanical event that draws specialist travellers from around the world. If you want to live somewhere genuinely extraordinary that has not yet been packaged into a lifestyle product, Ravensthorpe offers a seriousness of place that is increasingly difficult to find in modern Australia. Number 9. Cloncurry, Queensland. Cloncurry is deep outback Queensland, 770 kilometres inland from Townsville, sitting in the dry savanna country of the mineral-rich northwest. The town is the birthplace of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, which began operating from here in 1928 under the direction of John Flynn, whose vision of healthcare reaching every corner of Australia turned a remote Queensland outpost into a symbol of national ingenuity. That history matters because it tells you something about the character of a place always defined by the challenge of making things work at distance. The local mining sector continues to drive the economy, providing stability that purely agricultural towns often struggle to maintain. Median house prices sit in the low 200s, and for that sum, you get a house on a block that would be considered generous by any metropolitan standard. The summers here are brutally, genuinely hot, and that is not a detail to pass over lightly. But the winters are clear and dry and warm in a way that is difficult to describe without sounding promotional. The kind of mornings where the light is low and golden from sunrise and stays that way until mid-afternoon. The John Flynn Place Museum preserves the Flying Doctor history and remains one of the more moving small museums in Queensland. Cloncurry is not for the uncertain, but for someone who wants space and a mortgage that does not define their working life, it offers something rare. Number 10. Cooma, New South Wales. Cooma sits in the foothills of the Snowy Mountains in southern New South Wales, a town shaped by two of the largest infrastructure projects in Australian history. The first was the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme, which brought workers from over 30 countries through the 1950s and 1960s, leaving behind a community with a cosmopolitan food culture and a tolerance for difference that you do not always encounter in regional towns of this size. The Multicultural Festival, held in Cooma each year, is one of the few events in regional Australia that actually reflects the population it celebrates. The second ongoing economic driver is the ski season, which routes thousands of visitors through Cooma every winter on their way to Thredbo and Perisher, keeping the hospitality sector viable and the town economically connected to the national tourism circuit. Median house prices in Cooma sit around $350,000, higher than several entries on this list, but still well below the median for any Australian capital city. The town has strong schools, a hospital, and a commercial centre that has maintained its function without becoming a shadow of itself. The surrounding high country offers trout fishing, cross-country skiing, and walking trails across open plains that carry a particular kind of silence. Cooma rewards the person who does their research rather than waiting for someone else to make the recommendation. Number 11. Colac, Victoria. Colac sits at the northern edge of the Otway Ranges in Victoria on the shore of Lake Colac, the largest natural freshwater lake in the state, and a quiet secret to anyone who has not driven this stretch of the Prince's Highway. The town has a population of around 12,000, making it a functioning regional centre with the kind of commercial and healthcare infrastructure that smaller towns can only aspire to from a distance. The Great Ocean Road begins 45 minutes to the south. The Otway's rainforest, dense with fern gullies and waterfalls and mountain ash trees that dwarf the cars passing beneath them, begins almost at the edge of town. Median house prices in Colac sit around $340,000, genuinely affordable for a Victorian town with this level of access to services and landscape simultaneously. The farming community surrounding Colac produces some of the best dairy in Australia, and the town's deep connection to its agricultural hinterland gives it an authenticity that coastal tourist towns often sacrifice for seasonal visitors. The volcanic plains stretching north and east offer birdwatching and an open grassland landscape that changes through every season with a subtlety that rewards patience. Colac functions as a base rather than a destination, the kind of place from which you can reach almost anything in southwest Victoria while paying prices that reflect none of that proximity or convenience. Number 12. Casterton, Victoria. Casterton is in the far southwest of Victoria, in a green and rolling landscape of volcanic plains and river flats that occupies the country between the Grampians and the South Australian border, a region defined by merino wool, fine cattle, and one of the most underrated pastoral landscapes in Australia. The town is the recognised birthplace of the Australian Kelpie, the working sheepdog that became one of the country's most iconic breeds and whose documented origin involves a station called Warwick in the surrounding district, where the breed was developed through the 1870s. The Kelpie connection is not a tourist gimmick. It reflects something genuine about Casterton's identity as a working town, a place oriented around land and animals, and the practical knowledge of how to manage both well and without complaint. Every June, the Kelpie muster draws handlers from across Australia. Median house prices in Casterton sit below $200,000, placing it firmly in the category of genuine affordability. The Glenelg River runs through the district, offering canoe trails and fishing of the quiet, unhurried variety that city anglers drive 4 hours to find. The surrounding farmland carries a visual richness through spring and early summer that is easy to underestimate from a map. Casterton is for people who know what they want and have stopped apologising for how uncomplicated it turns out to be. Number 13. Port Augusta, South Australia. Port Augusta sits at the top of Spencer Gulf, where the outback begins and the sea ends, a town that has served as a crossroads of the continent since the rail lines first ran through it in the 19th century. The Garn passes through Port Augusta twice a week on its journey between Adelaide and Darwin, and watching that train leave for the Red Centre is one of those experiences that makes you feel the actual scale of this country in a way that no map can replicate. The town has a population of around 14,000 and functions as the service hub for an enormous hinterland stretching north into the Flinders Ranges and west toward the Nullarbor. Median house prices in Port Augusta sit around $190,000, among the most affordable on this list and representing genuine value given the level of infrastructure the town carries. The Flinders Ranges begin 60 kilometres to the north, a landscape of ancient mountain ridges and vast red gorges containing some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet. Wilpena Pound, the natural amphitheatre formed by a ring of ancient peaks, is a 2-hour drive from Port Augusta's main street. The town has navigated genuine economic challenges as power industries shifted, but the community here has the resilience of a place built to carry weight. The Arid Lands Botanic Garden at the edge of town rewards a slow walk. Port Augusta rewards people who look past the first impression. 13 towns across Australia, and not one of them on the cover of a property magazine. That is not a coincidence. The towns that make financial sense rarely look like a lifestyle brand, and the towns that make emotional sense rarely appear in a trending algorithm. But they exist, all of them, with their median prices and their rivers and their heritage buildings and the people who chose to be there. If the answer involves space and silence and the ability to own the ground beneath your feet, then Australia still has room for that. It simply takes knowing where to look. Subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs a new set of coordinates, and leave the town you would choose in the comments. The best recommendations always come from the people who genuinely made the move.